Hello, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Well, this video about John Charmley was cut off a few seconds in by accident, so sort of finish off mostly commenting on the late Professor Charmley's argument, because he subscribed to the fashionable view the United Kingdom ought to have fought shy of fighting in the First World War, but the profoundly unfashionable view that the United Kingdom ought to also have stayed out of the Second World War, that appeasement was a policy worth pursuing. I mean, I agree with him on all points, but address myself to the Second World War. This was the bloodiest war in human history. Over 60 million people were killed. Now, few people predicted it would last quite as long. Winston Churchill, a month into the war, when he's first Lord of the Admiralty, not Prime Minister yet, he said the war was going to last at least 3 years. And indeed, it turned out to be six. But other things about it is with major industrialized countries on either side, it was going to kill several million people at least. And that's the lesson that they learned from the First World War, that technology was not speeding war up, as in shortening it, and so on. It was, obviously far from certain the United Kingdom was going to win. Obviously, it was the British Empire. As Charmley said, there's this Churchillian myth the United Kingdom fought alone when it had, what was it? It was a third of the world's land surface and something like 20% of the world's population. And all right, apart from, say, Canada and Australia, they weren't industrialized. Even the Indian Army, most of their weapons were manufactured in the United Kingdom and shipped out to them. Um, but said for various reasons that uh, this war, even if the Allies won, which they did, was going to become an enormous cost to the Allies as well. You could only defeat a genocidal tyranny by taking the side of a genocidal tyranny, which was the Soviet Union, which had committed genocide before the Third Reich, and that was the Ukrainian Holodomor, or the Kazakh genocide, which, even if you're ethnic Russians, there was mass murder of civilians in the Soviet Union. People shot dead, sometimes by a doika, just a so-called court, a trial with two intelligence officers, and slavery reintroduced their frank racist policies, deporting whole ethnic groups on the basis of their ethnicity by cattle truck, huge numbers of them dying on the way, people being transported by cattle truck and people being gassed. That was pioneered in the Soviet Union. I know it wasn't on the same scale as the Third Reich, and they were doing it first, and so on. Having said that, the Third Reich was even worse, but people didn't know that in 1939, and the war was not fought because of the Holocaust, which only began properly after January 1942, the Wannsee Conference. It's true that the Third Reich had murdered, thousands of Jewish civilians prior to that. Kristallnacht alone in 1938, November 1938, that was in peacetime. 100 Jewish men murdered there. There was Operation T4, which was the program to murder physically and mentally disabled people, whatever their ethnicity, in Germany. And that had murdered several thousand people before the war was begun. But again, that wasn't a ground given for proclaiming war, in as much as it was secret, just wasn't mentioned by Neville Chamberlain or anybody else, and so on. So, not to say that the Third Reich was good, it certainly wasn't, it was evil. But I have not come across any evidence whatsoever they had any desire to impose their system on the United Kingdom or anywhere to the west, or to claim an inch of British territory, including the British colonies and so forth. So I hold absolutely no brief for Nazism. I oppose totalitarianism. I revile regimentation and its incipient totalitarianism in advanced Western democracies such as the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. That's what really worries me these days, is the genocidal tendencies of many people in the mainstream in the United Kingdom that are a problem. I'm a sort of lonely voice on the right against those. Anyway, so Charmley said, yeah, this was going to kill millions of people. They didn't know that the Allies would win. They only won by having a vicious, bloodthirsty, totalitarian regime, the Soviet Union, win and advance effectively 1,000 miles further west to the heart of Europe, west of Berlin, and so on. And there was really no reason to think the United States was going to come in. And they didn't. The America First Committee was very, very popular. President Roosevelt was receiving hundreds of letters a day saying not only to stay out of the war, but not to ship any weapons to the United Kingdom. The Neutrality Act, there should be no derogation from that, which he managed to get Congress to pass, saying, well, if we sell weapons to the United Kingdom, it enhances American security. Even after Pearl Harbor, there first was no reason to think that Germany was going to declare war on the United States. And indeed, if they hadn't done, the United States would not have come into the Second World War. And even if they had come in, you thought there might have been an Asia First policy. Very, very luckily for the UK, it was a Europe First policy, and so on. So There was really no way the United Kingdom could have won. Obviously, saw, as Churchill said before, El Alamein never a victory after El Alamein never defeat. Bit of an oversimplification, but still, I can't get the victories. Even Churchill, in Churchill's biography by Boris Johnson, Johnson says that there was less grit, determination, drive, and valor amongst British troops. Wow, how damning. Is that true? I don't know. I don't want to impugn the honor of all of them and say so. Some of them would have been very courageous and all the rest of it, and self-sacrificing, and I'm certainly not. But anyway, after the loss, the fall of France, and so on, there was really no way the United Kingdom, the whole British Empire, could take back anywhere of mainland Europe, and indeed didn't even try. The Saint-Nazaire raid, the Dieppe raid, largely failures and fairly costly. It was only the United States came in; they had a good chance. So for all these reasons, the thing was to stay out. Look at the countries that stayed out, like Switzerland, Sweden, at peace for over 200 years. What they're so prosperous. Switzerland with no oil, no gas, almost no coal, no precious metals, hardly any non-precious metals, not much good farmland, no coastline, just mountains, and surrounded by much mightier states. France, Germany, in its time, Austria was very potent and enormous, their empire, and they've got peace just through the peace has brought them riches. And Sweden, likewise, the Republic of Ireland. What did we lose by staying out? And you might say, okay, we didn't get Northern Ireland because two public offers a nation once again, as Churchill wrote to De Valera, and De Valera turned it down flat. And in the Irish Republic, well, the Irish Free State at the time, saying no to even a slice of Northern Ireland in 1925. So having been offered it a few times or thrice, you don't get a fourth chance. You don't get a fourth bite of the cherry. So goodness. Yeah, and supposing that the United Kingdom had stayed out, presumably France wouldn't have fought. Poland would have been crushed. It was absolutely horrific for the Poles. No question about it. Would have been hell on earth. But that's actually not Britain's problem. This was an unsolicited offer to Poland when the United Kingdom couldn't do anything and didn't even attempt to attack in the West to distract the Germans in September 1939. And it could have even sent troops to Poland to be on the German border, and that might have been a deterrent. Nobody even suggested that one. So didn't tell the truth. The truth to the Poles. They weren't actually going to help. So the number of people killed in this war was double the entire population of Poland. And the Third Reich's illegal occupation of Poland was absolutely barbaric, as so was that the Soviet Union. And by the way, if the Allies had to declare war on anyone who invades Poland, they had to declare war on the Soviet Union. And Britain even sent some troops to Finland when the Soviets were invading Finland, didn't do it. The UK did even toy with the idea of attacking the Soviet Union in 1939 after what they'd done to Poland. They said their oil wells in Baku would burn very easily, but didn't do it in the end. Thankfully, thank goodness. And by the way, I'm very, very glad that the Allies won, despite me thinking it was the wrong decision to declare war. Definitely the good side won. For all the faults of the United States with lynching, with Jim Crow laws, for all the faults of France with massacres of Algerians, the United Kingdom, for all its faults, nevertheless, the moral balance was their favor rather than the Third Reich. So Poland would have been invaded. I suppose the Soviet Union would have been invaded, and then probably the Third Reich would have conquered them. Would that have been worse for the world than the Cold War, which caused all sorts of wars all over Africa and Asia and so on, and affects the world negatively to this day? It's an open question. So I mean, Hitler was obviously absolutely satanic, psychopathic. So very, very evil indeed, just like Stalin, who to some extent was his role model. The difference is Russia still extolling Stalin, where Germans, thank goodness, are not singing the praises of Der Führer, who was absolutely wicked beyond belief. Goodness, may we have peace.